Welcome to Beyond Our Voices. This time we're dealing with trauma and our emotions. And with me is Dr Marcel Londt, who is a clinical social worker at the University of the Western Cape. Marcel, thank you very much for joining us. So when we talk trauma, what is trauma? Is it a collective? What is it?
The simplistic way of looking at it, it's something bad that happens in your life. However, how one person experiences that can be very different. And so we have to be careful not to dismiss, what the experience is for you. What we do know is that a traumatic experience, it takes away our voice and it pushes us into a kind of cocoon where we seek safety and solace until something else happens.
And it could be any kind of trauma.
Like I said, trauma is not specific to an incident. It could be domestic violence, it could be a personal event in your life. There are many ways to describe it, but the bottom line is how that individual experiences it.
The premise of the entire series of what we're doing here is the power of telling your story and then processing it from there on, and trauma could be anything. Trauma can be, the violence of adoption, as you said, domestic violence or anything that has happened to us in our lives. What happens when we start processing trauma? What kind of emotions can we expect?
Unfortunately, for many of us, that process only starts when there's another event. We're locked into a silent world for many years, and we forget that trauma often is cumulative. And so you may have had many horrible events and just dismissed it. However, it takes the one incident that pulls you out of that cocoon. And so when we start using our voices to verbalize what's happened to us, it kind of challenges you to step away from that safety of the distance of my prior life.
So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Are you meant to step away or?
I don't think one can sit in judgment of that. It's where that individual is. So if you've experienced a traumatic event and you get to that crossroads where now it's time to talk, now it's time to use your voice, then we need to find a way to engage and meet that individual and to respect the reality of that event at that time.
And how do we go about sort of breaking the silence and letting go of trauma? Because there can also be a comfort to holding on to it.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, for many of us, that traumatic event defines who you are, and you wear it like a badge of honor.
I know it sounds terrible, but it does. It sounds terrible, but so what do you mean by that when someone...
So, often you wear that as a badge of honor. Something bad happened to me, so therefore don't expect me to deal with it and put it into words. And I think we need to pay attention to that, because not everybody is ready to let go. And so when that person or when you are ready to engage and confront, that's when we say, let's see if we can talk you through this. Let's see if we can give you the skills and the competencies to deal with the emotions that's going to come with that.
And what emotions can we expect?
Very scary, very frightening. Initially, it's a distancing. We kind of shrug it off and we're dismissive. But as we take one layer off at a time, it's like peeling an onion. And when the tears come, the emotions can hardly be described in a single word, because it's complex. It's confusion, it's anger, it's resentment, it's self-blame, it's self-judgment. And it's a process that you have to allow yourself to experience before you can move on to the next level.
And how do you work that emotion? So let's say I'm feeling sad. what do I do? Do I sit in that? I mean, you don't want to sit in victim mode. You don't want to be too absorbed. But how do you actually then, when we say process an emotion, I mean, what does that mean? Do I sit there and just feel that emotion and then what?
It's also about being honest, about saying, this is the one time in my life I'm not going to self-medicate. This is the one time in my life I'm not going to deny. And so processing that emotion means different things to different people. For myself, it might mean I'm verbalizing it. It might mean I'm going to put it in a journal and acknowledge the feelings that I'm going through. And it may be very different for somebody else. And I think what I'm advocating is whatever your journey, you demand to be respected, and you deserve that. There's no timeline and there's no protocol for how to process your experience. So if the dominant feelings are resilience, or you think you're strong enough, underneath that, the frustration, the hopelessness, it's about allowing you to engage with it when you're ready and how you are ready. Like I said, there's no protocol.
No protocol, but I'm just sort of thinking now, if someone is sitting listening to us and watching us, and they're feeling traumatized or they're being triggered by something that happened in their life, I mean, what would you say to them? What would you say, how do you go about dealing with that?
The first step is to step aside and to acknowledge what's going on and to acknowledge that it's normal under the circumstances.
So I can be hurt, I can be sad, I can be angry, I can be anything I want to be.
You're entitled to feel exactly what you are feeling. And I think it's at that point that you decide what are the mediums I want to use. A lot of people aren't ready or don't have the means to go to therapy, but they may have a journal and they may plot and, write about their feelings and see what unfolds. And often that journey is quite personal. You'll see the resentment, the hostility, the resignation, the frustration, the hurt. And then you'll see it looping back to hopefulness. And there is hope in starting that journey. There is hope in reaching the recovery and the healing that you want. But you have to do it at your own pace. Like I said, there's no protocol. Nobody can decide what you should be feeling and how you should be dealing with it at a particular time.
So it's okay to cry, to be angry. I don't know, I'm just trying to think, like, how does one really process trauma? How do you go through trauma or process your own trauma in your own space to get to a point where you can pick up the pieces of your life and sort of carry on?
You give yourself time. You take it one step at a time. You don't set your recovery to the timeline of other people. And so whether you're using a journal initially, whether you're using telephone service, or whether you're using a buddy to kind of say, this is what I'm feeling. Help me talk through this, help me listen to me through this. So it's one step at a time, doing what works for you. And I think that's the difficulty with dealing with trauma, that we all think, there's one way to do it. There isn't. It's your journey.
And it could be an endless journey.
It's your journey. And it's not a journey that's a once-off event. It's a process. And if you allow yourself to go through that process, that's the beginning of your healing. So it's not a once-off event. If I cry today, tomorrow I wipe my tears and I put my mascara back on and life goes on. It's not like that. It's a journey. It's a process.
So how do we step back from emotions that are sort of overwhelming us? Because there is a point where you've got to say, okay, I can't be in this space for too long. I mean, I have to go and feed the kids. I've got, go to work, whatever.
I think one of the kind of attitudes or truism is that if you are too much in your head, it's time to feel. And if you're overwhelmed by feelings, it's time to think. And that's the golden line. So the time of thinking is when I've got to feed the kids, I've got to take the dogs for a walk, I've got to do what I need to do, whatever other roles I have in my life. But then the time comes where I allow myself to feel, and I allow myself to experience whatever those feelings are and name it according to my experience.
Now, for us as women, we sit here, we talk about emotions. These things are easy for us. What about men who have trauma, who've been abused, who feel that they don't always have the space or haven't been given that space just generally in their life? Is there a difference for them?
I think the misnomer is that as women, we kind of think we own the feeling paradise. What do men do when they experience trauma? They get drunk, they go gambling, some use pornography, whatever. Women do some of the same stuff. And I think it's about allowing the space for men to say, I'm not doing so well with this. And to break the stereotype that, cowboys don't cry. If we look at the statistics in this country and elsewhere, men are as prone to particular kind of violence and trauma as women are. That's something that we haven't acknowledged as much as we should. So yes, initially men guard themselves by cutting off from the emotions, but then so do we. And I think it's about messaging that we understand what you're going through, that there's no shame in acknowledging. I mean, of course, you're not going to walk into your manager's office and bang your head on his desk and ask for Kleenex. Neither would a woman do that.
No. What can we expect from people around us when we share our stories?
The sad reality is that often unexpected or unrealistic expectations are premeditated resentments. So if we working from the premise that everybody's going to understand, they should understand, and they don't, it shuts one up and it makes you retreat further into that world of silence. And so I think the responsibility here is to use your words and say, this is what I need. And if that individual or your closest support system cannot provide that, you find somebody else to have that conversation with.
Because it's important to be believed, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. However, it's important that I believe my own truth and I can stand in my own authority where I expect somebody else is going to be able to do that. So what are we learning about trauma? I've got to stand in my own authority. I've got to stand in my truth. If I want somebody to acknowledge and I want somebody to meet me on that journey to recovery and healing.
Marcel, thank you very much. Thank you for being on the show today. And just as a little something, just to say thank you, a T-shirt painted by Picasso, the painting pig. It's the artwork that she did for us, and it's called Unchained. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And thank you for joining us here on Beyond Our Voices. Go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, and join us on the next broadcast. Goodbye.